Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sit through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes, and I'm joined with my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler, and today we're talking about...
Am I the jerkhole? Now, if that sounds like a funny word to you, we're actually making it up because we can't say the real word on the air. But, you know, it's the thing that everybody's got, sort of like opinions, if you know that phrase. And there is a Reddit forum that, it's drawn a lot of attention over the years, and it's incredibly helpful from a moral philosophy perspective because people go on it and they ask the question, am I a jerk? Or as we're going to say here, the jerkhole. It's AITA. And a while back, Dan and I did an episode devoted to looking through these and saying, can these be useful exercises or useful cases for thinking about ethical life and decision making and all the stuff that goes into personal development? And the answer is yes. They're also pretty entertaining, I think, some of them. And so we're not going to spend too much time rehashing what we talked about back in that episode. And we might do more of these in the future because they're so much fun to unpack. Instead, we've got a whole bunch of cases lined up that Dan and I are going to go through and examine and analyze and talk about, you know, is somebody the jerk? Is somebody else the jerk? Is everybody? How do they put it on the forum? Everybody's a jerk.
Everyone sucks here.
Oh, okay, yeah. And then there's there's the possibility that nobody's bad, right?
Right.
So we're going to do a little bit of decision making and judgment about them, and you can participate in this as well. You can think about them as we're reading it aloud. What would you say about these? We're always happy to get listener comments about the show. So before we launch into these, Dan, anything you think we need to hit on?
Just to reiterate, a large part of philosophy is ethics, and there are many different schools of ethics, and we've talked about a lot of them in the past. It's kind of like one of our go-to topics of conversation. But we can talk about theory all we want, but unless you're actually starting to put these things into practice, you're not going to really find those edge cases where you're making you feel uncomfortable. And the whole point of this exercise is that we have the ability to look at actual real-world experiences and apply our moral theories to them, and see how these kind of make us feel as well as make other people feel that we're actually utilizing this ethical muscle.
That's actually a great set of points. One of the psychologists who is probably most associated with the notion of moral development and moral development theory is Lawrence Kohlberg. And he's got this, these stages like stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and you move from a pre-conventional sort of just, response to stimulus, punishment and reward, all the way up through looking for social approval or, buying into things like a social contract or ultimately, values that can be shared universally. But one of the things that he stresses is that we learn how to progress from one stage to another, not by being given a handbook or just a pat on the head. We actually develop through conflict, through finding out that we're wrong about things and then readjusting, often not, happily, but and so I think these cases can be really helpful. And we should, the ones that we have picked out, because we went through, the many thousands that are available on the forum. They're adding, maybe, I don't know, hundreds a week. We wanted to pick those that are kind of difficult, that don't have an easy, oh, it's this way or it's this way kind of solution. And that's so that we can really sink our teeth into them and maybe learn something in the process.
Right.
Hey, well, so there's something I wanted to have us consider before we jump in. And I think this is a really interesting issue. So there's this quip from Jonathan Tropper, The Book of Job. And I don't know that I completely agree with it. He lists it as Descartes' jerk-hole axiom, I think, therefore I'm not one. And so what he says is the fact that I suspect that I'm a jerk-hole means that I probably am not, because a real jerk-hole doesn't think that he's a jerk-hole, does he? Therefore, by realizing that I am a jerk-hole, I am in fact negating that very realization, am I not? So, given that formulation, what's your initial reaction to that? Do you buy it?
I feel it's a false dichotomy.
Okay.
So I guess, at least for one's own personal morality, I guess you start to realize when you're interacting with other people, if your morals are actually resulting in the beneficial encounters that you want with other people, and so you either have you've got a set of axioms, and people are really unhappy about them, and you are a jerkhole, and you don't even realize, you're like, oh, well, those people are just jerks.
Yeah.
Not knowing that the fact that everyone is a jerk means that you're a jerk, and they're all responding to you in that kind. There are those people who have realized that, like, as this particular axiom goes, and that they stop doing these things. And then I think there's definitely a place in between, a liminal space, where you start to learn these things, but you're still doing jerky things, and so you're still the jerkhole.
And you're kind of making progress away from being a jerk, right?
Right.
Yeah, and you could be like cool in one way and also a jerk in another way, right? At the same time. So maybe there's a number of ways to get out of this. I think you're right. It is a false dichotomy. I kind of think that there are some people who suspect that they're jerks and actually are jerks, but don't completely understand, maybe because they haven't been given enough tools, how and why they're jerks. So maybe just suspecting that you're a jerk doesn't get you off the hook.
Or once again, you could totally embrace being the jerk because you think that what you're doing gets you what you consider to be the good, and you can say, like, I'm solely a jerk, but it gets results, and that's what they consider the good in this case.
Yeah, it also, I think there's some people who are pretty cynical, and they think everybody's a jerk. Why shouldn't I be a jerk? Right? They're laboring under a certain kind of misanthropy or paranoia about other human beings, and so that justifies for them that jerkish behavior. I'm also reminded, before we jump into the cases, of something that I've seen as a professor over, the last 20 years. I have colleagues who complain about students, and, the students, they don't listen in class and they're not engaging with the material and all that. And then I've observed their classes and they behave in jerkish ways towards their students. They act like, oh, we're reading Plato, and Plato's so much beyond all of you rum-dums, who aren't philosophy majors, you business majors or fashion majors or communication majors. And then they're really surprised that the students don't like them and don't spend a lot of time reading the text that they've just talked up, the difficulty and inaccessibility of, right? and then the students, it's sort of like a feedback loop, right? The students are unenthusiastic or hostile, and then they come back at the students, and they talk down to them, or they're, arbitrarily picking on one student or another. And it makes for a really bad classroom dynamic. And then, they don't realize that they're essentially the catalyst causing that, because you can take the same set of students and a different instructor who is like, oh, this is difficult stuff, but we're going to work our way through it. And I think this is really valuable. I hope you find it's valuable. Here's some resources to help you. Oh, you've made a mistake. You're not a dummy. This is a common mistake that students make in doing this. Let's walk our way through it. And the students respond usually positively to that. And then it creates a positive feedback loop. I've seen a lot of my peers, just, blame the students for everything. And it's like you were saying, right? If everybody else around you is the jerkhole, no, it's probably not them. It's probably you, right?
Yeah. And then I guess the only other quadrant, and probably not an exhaustive list, is when you have people from really different backgrounds, and there are certain expectations, and one person coming from a totally different paradigm thinks that he's acting in a very moral expected way.
Yeah.
And they're not. For example, I had a friend who was an engineer from India, and he I was having some people. We went out to a bar for a birthday.
Okay.
For it was my birthday, and usually, at least in the United States, kind of the idea is the birthday person usually drinks for free, or at least gets at least one free drink.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the night. Apparently, his axiom was that the birthday person buys the other's drinks. And so I was expecting him to pay for my drink, and he was expecting me to pay for his drink. And it's just like, what's going on here?
So the bill comes and both of you are looking at each other like, okay, come on.
Exactly. Yeah, right.
I've heard that for other countries as well. I don't know if it's actually true or not, but I had a German friend who told me that was the case in Germany. And so you avoid going out on your birthday because you don't want to pay for things. But I think that's actually a great point too. There are a lot of ways in which, what would we call them? Cultural differences of cultural norms. Could lead to significant misunderstandings of people being jerks. And then because we typically get hostile or angry towards jerks or withdraw from them, there's a good chance for other people to see us as being jerks as a response, right?
Right. Oh, I guess it comes down to that communication breakdown. It's always the same.
And in the cases that we've got here, I think that is the problem for quite a few of them is a lack of effective communication. Things are being communicated, but they're not the messages that the other person actually wants to hear.
Right. So maybe let's jump right into it.
Let's do case number one. Yeah.
Case number one. Okay. Am I the jerkhole for telling the truth and exposing a web of lies my wife has spun? Ooh. So, my wife has been lying a lot lately. She is obviously conscious of people's feelings, and she uses white lies to shift the blame onto others to lessen the blow of a situation, always to her benefit. She will find herself in situations where she wants to back out of weekend plans with her friends, or explain why she did something seemingly rude, etc. But she always blames me. My husband doesn't want me to leave this weekend. Sorry he's being such an jerk. Or, I only screenshotted this conversation we had because my husband told me he wanted to see it. Sure, I can handle someone confronting me about that stuff far better than she can. She has high anxiety when it comes to confrontation, but I'm really sick of being her scapegoat and letting people think I'm a selfish jerk. I was watching our kids this weekend while my wife hosted a bachelorette trip for her friends at my wife's aunt's lake house. Last night, my wife calls me and says I can come over with the kids rather than wait till early this morning like planned. I get to the lake house and the girls are still out at a bar somewhere, so I let myself in and put the kids to bed. My wife's aunt texts her after seeing me on her security cam and tells her she is upset that I was there. That's weird to me because she and I get along very well, and I'm even renting a house from her. She has really high anxiety, but she manages it really well most of the time. She then texts me this morning and begins yelling at me about how I got no right to invite myself over and that I'm a bad father. Naturally, I'm shocked and asked her what she meant. Turns out my wife texted her saying she didn't know I was coming over and that I'm an incompetent father and she had to help me because I don't know how to watch our kids. I told her that was not true and that my wife invited me to come because she knows it was closer to my work and I could sleep in rather than get up early to bring the kids. I, of course, confronted my wife about why she would lie about me and say things like that about me. She then goes and gets mad and says that she was doing damage control in the situation and that it was far better for her aunt is mad at me than her. So now we're fighting because I, of course, don't appreciate being put in that situation, but my wife thinks it was a necessary sacrifice to keep her aunt happy with her. So, TLDR, wife told her aunt to lie to save face. Aunt confronted me. I told the truth. Wife is now mad at me. What do you think, Greg?
Well, this is an interesting one, and there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, at first, I don't think that the guy is the jerk at all. I think clearly the wife is a jerk in this case. And the interesting question is, well, how and why, and I think it's telling that this is not just like one situation that's a completely out of the blue one-off sort of thing, but it sounds like this is part of a dynamic, and that it may have like hit the last straw, the straw that broke the camel's back sort of thing. I mean, what's your view on this one?
Yeah, I'm with you here as well, that, the husband is not the jerkhole here. And there's a history of bad actions in the past, and specifically, I see two major things. One is just kind of lying in general is usually not the go-to, and if that is your regular modus operandi, then that allows you to easily do larger lies.
Yeah. I think that there's something about this though, so let's say you are a couple and you're like, oh man, it's the end of the week. We're both really tired. We just want to like order a pizza and watch a show rather than go to this event that we're signed up for and people are expecting us. And now you talk about it, right? And you're like, okay, both of us are cool with this. We're gonna come up with some, and it's a lie. We're going to come up with some justification. We'll say that one of us fell down and hit their head. Just make up something, right? And then we obviously can't go. There's a, I don't know, what would we call it? There's like consent there. There's agreement. There's a working something out together. Whereas let's say it's you and me, right? And we say that we're going to go on and do a radio show. And then instead of, I flake out, and instead of telling the station manager that I flaked out, I just shift the blame to you completely. And you don't even know that I'm shifting the blame to you. That sounds more like this situation, right? So it's not just the lying, this sounds a little weird, but it's the lying without having gotten somebody else to co-sign it or to consent to it.
Right. Because the whole idea of like, if you're in a marriage, this is a partnership.
Yeah.
Is it not? And that you're like, there are certain things, especially if you kind of like know what your partner would do in a certain situation.
Yeah.
You might be able to make certain decisions for them. But it seems that he's not happy about the state of the situation. And yeah, the whole idea of making these excuses and shifting the blame without his permission that he can do that. It's like, it's one thing to like go to a party and you say like, okay, to your partner, okay, when I start sneezing, that is the sign that we need to get out of this party. So I'm done with it. And so politely excuse ourselves. But like there needs to be communication of what is an acceptable sacrifice, I guess you'll make for that particular relationship. And obviously, one person is making this decision without their partner's consent, and that's not conducive for the long-term relationship.
Do you think it matters in a case like this, like how damaging the lies are? I mean, some of the things like saying that somebody's an incompetent father, that's pretty heavy stuff, right?
That's harsh.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, it's one thing to like, he was feeling under the weather today or something.
Yeah.
But like, that's a pretty big value judgment that you just throw out there as a way to save face. I guess I don't particularly value reputation all that much, but
there's some aspects that could kind of get you in trouble if you're throwing around accusations of being a bad parent. Maybe social services gets called, or
right. There are definitely dispreferred things that are going to happen later.
Yeah.
If that is a known expectation about you.
What about the anxiety thing? One could make the case that, okay, his wife, his sister-in-law, they both suffer from anxiety. Maybe that gets them off the hook for their particular behavior. And mostly the wife in this case, right? Mm-hmm. And the wife is clearly anxious about how people view her. She doesn't want to be the one who's viewed as the baddie.
Right. I guess, as far as I can tell from this, that confrontation is the major trigger for her anxiety. But just because you have a medical condition isn't an excuse for you doing bad things.
Yeah.
And what I see here is her executing bad things by telling these lies, and especially calling him a bad husband or a bad father, in order to save her that discomfort. I know that anxiety can be really crippling, but you need to find a better way to deal with that than also causing harm.
It's interesting now that I think about it. So if she's using this mode of behavior, which is, borderline abusive, to deal with her anxiety toward that's felt towards other people and what they think of her, you would think that it would be counterproductive in some way, because it would lead to at least some anxiety about how her spouse feels, whether he's going to stay with her, how he views her. It's sort of like, I don't know. It's, again, I go back to students who often say, "Oh, I can't get these assignments done because of my anxiety," but then they're very worried about how you look at them as well as an instructor. Maybe some responses to anxiety they're rational on a certain level, but they're also irrational on a higher level.
Yeah. I know I've got a little anxiety myself, but I do have certain coping mechanisms to deal with it. I know it feels really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It is a very strong physiological response to it. But I guess in my case, I don't see anywhere where I'm going to start using that excuse to hurt other people.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that there's a duty if you're in a close relationship? So it could be like a marriage. It could be like a long-term partnership. It could be a close friendship, that if you are, and we'll broaden it from anxiety to other things. If you're suffering from something that causes you to every once in a while go off course and do something that's harmful to the other person, do you have a duty to get that under wraps in some way? To start going to therapy or finding, as you said, coping mechanisms to not necessarily to completely root it out, but at least minimize what happens.
I would say yes, as well as when you do it, you should realize that these things, in retrospect, you should see that these things aren't good actions. And so if you're asserting that this is a good thing that you've done this, I guess I would have a problem with that assessment.
That's an interesting.
Is still a bad thing, and her idea that this is a good thing, that this absolves her of any guilt for this.
That's a problem.
Is definitely a problem.
Okay.
She's not working towards bettering or even acknowledging that there's anything wrong here.
Yeah. Do you think that the fact that there's kids raises the stakes? Because the kids are observing this interaction between mom and dad. I mean, in a way differently than say like pets would. Pets don't care if you. I mean, you can yell at each other.
Right.
You don't like that, but they're not picking up bad character traits as being normal.
I guess if that's within earshot of the kids, then I'd say is I'm not quite sure if that is actually the truth in this particular example.
Okay.
But yeah, that's definitely not something that one would want to model a relationship around.
Okay. Let's go on to the next one. The next one's a bit shorter, and this one's I'm curious to see what you make of this one. Am I the jerk for making the best of my work trips? Am I the jerkhole for taking advantage of work trips to ride my bike in new places? Over the last 6 months, I've started having to travel a fair amount for work. During the trips, I do my best to ensure that it's as short a trip as possible. For example, if possible, I'll fly in on a Monday afternoon, work Tuesday, then fly out first thing Wednesday morning. Recently, I've made it a habit of bringing my road bike on these trips. The bike box can be checked for free. Before my trip, I'll find some local route that I want to do. I'll adjust my schedule to get my ride in, often starting at 5 a.m. This has been irritating my wife. She thinks that I'm going on mini vacations because I'm bringing my road bike. I've made the argument that I'm not adding any time to my work trips as I'm not staying over additional days to do these rides. This is an interesting one. And at first, my temptation was to say, no, he's totally not being the jerkhole at all. It's an overreaction. But then as I thought about it more, I thought, well, maybe there's something to this. What's your view, Dan?
Yeah, for the action itself, it's not a bad action. I would call the action itself not a jerkhole, but I felt like there's something more to this, and I don't think it's the surface reason, but it's more along the lines of I feel how the wife can feel left out in one of these experiences, that her husband's going on and doing all these fun things out of town without her, and once again, you're married, you're in a partnership, and she's feeling like, oh, he's getting all these vacations in without me.
Yeah.
Why don't I get a vacation? And why is all like if you're not prioritizing that relationship? And I feel like there's a place there where a sliver has been entered in.
This might be one of the cases where we don't actually have enough information to make a really great decision about it. Because we do want to know why. So he's saying she thinks I'm going on mini vacations. Why should that necessarily bother her? Like, if I can tell you that if my wife wanted to go on mini vacations while she was going to a conference or something like that, I'd be totally cool with it. In fact, I'd probably encourage it. So why does she feel like he's doing something without her and she's missing out on it? Or maybe it's something that they should be doing together, or if she's not having fun, he shouldn't be having fun. We don't actually know from this this little vignette, do we?
Right. Yes, I have to, like I said, the action itself, as described, is not a bad action in and of itself.
It actually strikes me as a positive action. He's doing something thoughtful. It's healthy for him. It's, imagine if it was instead. So when I have this layover, I try to find the, closest strip joint that I'm going to like sit around in and blow money and drink liquor and look at other, people. And, this isn't that. This is a guy getting on his bike at 5 a.m. to ride around. I mean, not the sort of thing I'd want to do anyway, but, I could see like going hiking or going to a museum. Those things strike me as like, well, you're improving your life. You're doing something productive.
As well as he gets to do something that would, if he pursues it outside, would cost them as a married couple money. So
right.
There's a benefit there.
Yeah.
He's pursuing his goals. But yeah, once again, there's definitely something else here that is left unknown.
So maybe a lesson that we can take from this that I had no idea we were going to learn is oftentimes when we get these scenarios, we really have to have more information. and we should exercise a certain restraint in making judgments. And puzzlement may be where we wind up rather than a clear judgment.
Right. So, shall we move to the next one? All
This
right.
one's very funny.
So, am I the jerk for eating someone else's Chipotle order? So, like manna from heaven. This happened a year ago. I still feel weird about it. So one day, in the afternoon, I was starving. I was watching some TV when someone knocked on the door. When I opened the door, there was a Chipotle delivery man outside holding a delivery. Without a second thought, I took it, thinking my parents probably ordered it for me. As soon as I closed the door, I rushed to the table and ate it super quickly. I was very hungry. The delivery was very good, and once I had finished eating it, I went back to watching TV. A half hour later, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened the door, I saw a regular dude who asked me if a Chipotle package might have come by here by accident. Immediately, I was horrified. He knew it too from my eyes and said, "You ate it, didn't ya?" He didn't look mad, just empty. Feeling super bad, I said yes and offered to even pay for what I ate. Instead, he just said it was fine and left. Am I the jerk for eating someone else's Chipotle order by accident? I don't know if accident is wholly warranted here.
Okay, why not?
He made an assumption. And we know what happens when you make an assumption.
Right.
You make a jerk out of you and me. And so at least there is like a little bit of a silver lining to this rain cloud, that he did own up to it immediately and he offered restitution. But he really should have actually checked if someone was ordering him and not just assumed that food coming to his house was going to be his.
Yeah, I'm a little bit intrigued by this. Why is he so torn up about it a year later? You know, it seems to have really stuck with him. And if it had really stuck with him, you know, the guys in his apartment building, you would have thought he could have like ordered Chipotle for that guy and sent it over. You know, if he really wanted to make restitution, it seems like an easy way to do so, rather than to just mull it over and feel bad for a year. Now, that doesn't make you a jerk. That just makes you, I don't know, poorly adjusted or, you know, counterproductive when it comes to your own personal development, maybe. It strikes me as a pretty minor incident. Go ahead.
Absolution. Like he offered to pay or buy some more Chipotle for him, but the guy denied that. And so maybe he was looking for, hey, I can do this so we can go back to an equal point. But now he just has to live with the fact that he did something that he doesn't think is good, and he sees his neighbor every once in a while, and every time he sees him, he's like, gosh, I really should have bought him some Chipotle. Why he doesn't just do it as like a random act.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, and it's a pretty trivial thing. It's sort of like taking somebody's parking space for an hour, or, opening somebody's mail is actually, you know, a federal offense, I think, right? Although you could just say, well, I didn't know it was yours.
Well, it's not technically the mail.
Oh, is it? It's not? You get a letter.
It was a Chipotle delivery.
Oh, no, I'm saying analogies to this, right?
Oh, okay, sure, yes.
So
yes.
It seems like, you know, fairly trivial stuff. Like, imagine you open mail for yourself, thinking that it's yours and it's the neighbor's, and it's actually just junk mail that you're going to throw out anyway, and they would probably throw out too. You know, this seems to be kind of like on that level. It's almost like not holding the door for somebody. You're worried about not holding the door for somebody a year later, you know?
Yeah.
That seems a little weird to me.
I actually have that issue.
Of holding
regularly.
Doors?
No, about opening other people's mail, because my next door neighbor, my address ends in a 9, his address ends in a 7.
Oh, okay.
And his first name and my first name are the same.
Are you serious?
No. Sorry, yes, I'm very serious. So every once in a while, I'm going through the mail, and he's like, oh, it says, Dan.
Yeah.
Oh, why do I have something from Disney? Okay.
Yeah. Well, so I think this one's pretty straightforward. Is he a jerk? I don't think so. What do you say?
He's a little bit of a jerk.
Okay.
I feel like him just assuming that food that arrives at his door is absolutely his, especially after, I don't know if you like used any of the mobile apps for ordering food.
Oh, we've had people sometimes just walk off with our food.
Right. But there's a myriad of problems that I found with these apps.
Yeah.
And there's always, it's better to double check.
That's true. Yeah. So maybe he had a duty of due diligence or something like that. I kind of like this idea of adding the category, not like a complete jerkhole, but kind of a jerkhole, you know?
Yeah. More of like, was it the difference between like murder and manslaughter?
Oh, right.
One has to have like premeditation and forethought. Whereas the other one's just like, well, yeah, screwed up real bad.
Yeah. That I mean, those are much more serious than this. But
oh,
yeah.
Yes, but there's definitely that either omission or commission, acts of omission or commission that you're doing something specifically because you intend to harm versus doing things just because you weren't very good about it.
Yeah, there's also like negligent homicide that's in there, kind of in that spectrum, where you should have thought something through but didn't. Yeah. Well, let's look at the next one. This is one that is very close to my heart as a cat lover. Am I the jerkhole for refusing to give up my cat even though my fiance is allergic? Me and my fiance moved in together in 2019. I've always been a pet person. My fiance is not, and he finally agreed to let me get a cat last year, provided I do all the work to take care of it. I agreed and happily feed the cat, clean the litter box, take him to the vet, etc. Shortly after we got the cat, my fiance started having allergies. Nothing life-threatening, but he says he has trouble sleeping at night due to a stuffy nose. He takes medicine and everything, but still says sleep is still hard. He gets about 7 to 8 hours of sleep almost every night, which is how much he slept before we got the cat, but he says he feels more well-rested when not sleeping in our apartment. I suggested he go to the doctor to look at other options to deal with the allergies, but he won't set up an appointment. The allergies don't bother him at all during the day, so I think he just forgets about it. I'm constantly vacuuming, washing the sheets, not letting the cat into our bedroom, etc. in order to try and help, but pet dander is next to impossible to get rid of. After a particularly bad night of sleep, my fiancé asked me to rehome the cat. I refused because I think it's wrong to give up an animal unless absolutely necessary, and we both made a commitment when we adopted the cat. Also, I think my fiancé's allergies are something he can live with since he usually gets enough sleep, and I feel like he hasn't tried every option to deal with it better. The cat is also a rescue and has been abandoned before. As a result, he is very attached to me and follows me everywhere. I would feel absolutely terrible giving him up because I know he wouldn't do well with the adjustment. My fiancé is upset because he feels like I'm choosing the cat over him. I hate that he's not sleeping as well as he could, and I really want him to be as comfortable as possible in his own home, but at the same time, I can't imagine giving up the cat. Am I the jerkhole? This one strikes me as a genuine moral dilemma, although I do have feelings about who the jerk is in this case.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take?
So let's talk about the moral dilemma first. So we've got two different competing goods, I guess we can talk about.
Seemingly competing, I think, is part of the problem. Yeah.
Right. And so you've got either the well-being of one's relationship or the well-being of this pet that you have made a commitment to take care of.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, I guess, how do you see those two intermingling?
I think the well-being of the relationship part is also got the weight of, the well-being of the fiance, right? So there's two things on that side, and you could say that one signifies the other. So her her taking as seriously as her fiance does his capacity to get sleep is for him signifying whether she cares as much about the relationship as he does. And he's really the one who's forcing the moral dilemma and saying, it's either this or that, right? And then she's the one who's feeling the moral dilemma. I kind of think it's not really a moral dilemma. It's a seeming moral dilemma, one that's being imposed by the fiance. And I think the key right here is that she says, I suggested he go to the doctor to look at other options, but he won't make an appointment. Right? So that right there is telling to me.
There are two actions that are happening here. We've got the woman who has the cat and seems to be doing everything she possibly can.
Yeah.
In order
Very
to actually make sure that both the relationship as well as the cat are happy. And there's a disconnect or a discontinuity between the amount of effort that she's going in to do this as the fiancé is going in to do this. And so, yeah, absolutely what you said, the whole decided not to go to the allergist, and thus he's not doing enough work to actually try to resolve this without going to basically the nuclear option here.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I know people who have allergies to pets that are in their homes, and find ways to live with it. And they do that in part because they value either the person who's attached to the pet or they value the pet themselves. So, I mean, it seems like the boyfriend or the fiance rather is not. I mean, she says he's not really a pet person. Right. So maybe he's just not into maybe he doesn't understand the value of the pet. It also, I mean, if the cat wasn't a rescue who's been abandoned before and very attached, and that she thinks that he wouldn't do well with the adjustment, I think it would be an easier case. They could consider having somebody else adopt the cat, but I don't know about this one.
As well as just the whole idea of once you enter into that agreement to take care of an animal, that is not something one should enter into lightly, just because he's might have not realized the full weight of this thing, but to remove yourself from that argument or that agreement is not what you would call excellent of a pet owner.
It reminds me, so when I was in graduate school down in Carbondale, Illinois, I lived in a trailer park for about 4 years because it was super cheap, and there were a lot of other students, either undergraduates or graduate students, who lived in trailer parks as well. For the same reason, it was super cheap, and many of them would adopt puppies or kittens. And then it was mostly the undergraduates. They were typically from the Chicagoland area, and they'd gone down to Southern Illinois because it was cheap in-state tuition, and it was a place that they could go to, and it was known for being a party school. So I think that was an attraction to quite a few students. They also had some programs that were particularly good, but quite a few of these students, especially with kittens, would adopt a kitten and then have it with them. And then when they moved home, they just left it in the trailer park to go wander around, look for food on its own. I actually ended up adopting one of them myself, who was very tame, and my cats I actually got along with, and he was clearly somebody's pet who'd just been abandoned. And there were many of these, and you could see it happening every end of the spring semester. There would suddenly be all these not feral, but abandoned adult animals wandering around, mostly cats. And I think that showed a real lack of maturity on their part, and effectively makes them the jerkholes in cases like that. Now, the the fiance. I don't know if he's maybe we need that classification. He's kind of a jerkhole in this case. I don't think she is at all. I think she's making a real bona fide effort to make the situation.
Resolve the situation.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine just abandoning one of my pets.
Yeah.
I've had cats and dogs most of my life, and oh man, I couldn't. Yeah, no, that I don't even want to think about. I
will tell you something, and some of the listeners might think, "Oh, wow, this guy's really a softie because of it." But when I was living in the trailer park, I had my cats, and I would let them outside, but I would keep them on like long clothesline leashes because I didn't want them wandering around everywhere in the trailer park because it was kind of dangerous for animals. And every once in a while, my cat, whose name was Little Boy, and he was gigantic. He grew to be about 25 pounds. And he would get loose. He was very strong, and he wanted to like check things out, so he'd get loose, and I would have to like walk up and down the rows calling for him, and then he'd like trot out, and he'd be happy, but I'd be worried sometimes that like, what if he got lost and he was missing me and doesn't know where he is and nobody's taking care of him, and that really got to me, that sense. And I think some people have the opposite of that. They're like, screw it. They're all out of my hair,
Oh.
But that's at antipodes how I feel about the animals that I've committed to.
Right. I've had and still do a very strong emotional attachment to my cat or my pets, specifically my cats. Family used to call me when I was younger, Dan the Cat Man.
I will say, and leading into our next one, which is about spiders. Yeah. So I've had a lot of different kinds of pets. I've had dogs, I've had cats, I've had guinea pigs. I've actually had pet spiders in kind of a way similar to the case that is going to be talked about here. Not like tarantulas, but like just go out and, get a crab spider and put it in a jar and keep feeding it. I didn't feel the kind of closeness and worry about it with arthropods as I did mammals, and I think maybe that's reflective of something. I think if I were to get like a snake, I don't think I would get as attached to it as I did cats or fish. I don't think I would get as attached to them.
So this last one here is my daughter is 16 and my son is 14. My son and my husband are both arachnophobes, and whilst my husband is okay with dealing with spiders, my son absolutely cannot be in the same house as a spider. Every time he sees a spider, he needs someone to kill it, or he'll do it himself if it's slow. Then he asks us to get pet control to hopefully kill any eggs or any other spiders. My daughter has always loved animals, and more specifically spiders. She has always wanted a pet tarantula, but we've always said, no way. The thing is scary and can bite. No, not to mention the costs. We already have 2 dogs and a cat. Recently, my daughter has been finding random spiders and catching them and bringing them into the home. I know about this, and my husband said, listen, as long as I never have to go into your room, I'm fine with it. However, my son did not know about this because he never goes into his sister's room, even though he's right across the hall from each other. There were a lot of spiders, and she kept them in plastic containers. She had to feed them by opening the lid. One day, my son was in his room, and a spider from his sister's room got in. He ran out and into his sister's room and found 2 medium-sized spiders on the wall. He was terrified and ran out of the house and texted me, saying he was going to a friend's house, that he's been staying there for 2 days. They're close family friends, so it's okay. But he has refused to come home, saying it's infested with spiders. My son was in complete anxiety and couldn't come home without the spiders gone. I put my foot down and told my daughter that we're going to get rid of every single spider. She was in hysterics, but to me, spiders are simply not worth my son being in constant anxiety in his own home. She's screaming favoritism and saying that we favor him because he's a boy. She also said that it's his mental issue, so he should just deal with it, and that is her room and her life, and she can do what she wants.
So I think that in this case, I don't think the mom is being a jerk. I think, and I think that there probably is favoritism being shown, but that's not enough to make you a jerk in this case, given the level of anxiety that's being displayed here. And I think there is a difference in the animals. It's different. Like if somebody had like a cat phobia and you had a cat in your room, and you're strongly attached to it, I don't know about that one, or a ferret or some other mammal, or maybe even certain birds. But spiders? I mean, I like spiders. I used to deliberately feed trapdoor spiders crickets to watch them, and that sucks for the crickets, right? But circle of life and all that. And I used to catch crab spiders and have them in my room and let them crawl on me. And I have a half brother who's had tarantulas, and tarantulas are actually kind of cool, and they don't really they're probably not going to bite you, But I don't know. I think that in a case like this, if it was like adult roommates, maybe I would actually say the adult roommate needs to get over his anxiety. But a kid who's arachnophobic, whose sister has filled up her room with spiders. What do you think?
Almost seems like a nightmare.
It doesn't seem well thought out. That's for sure.
Right. So I guess my first idea is like, as a parent, one has a duty to try and create a safe and healthy place for all of their children.
Okay. Yeah.
Other compromises can be made for her daughter, and so she can find potentially.
Oh yeah.
Put them out of the house. Put them in a shed outside someplace. They're wild creatures anyways. They know how to get through the winters and whatnot.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea.
Or potentially there are local nature centers where she can help. I grew up with. There's a place here in Milwaukee called the Urban Ecology Center that has a wide menagerie of different local creatures that they keep as part of their teaching tools. I assume there's at least a couple spiders there as well. I can't remember exactly, but there are other outlets for these things. Maybe she can have. Maybe she has a friend that's also similarly interested in spiders, and knowing that their house has a problem with that. So there are other potential options here.
Yeah. This one also strikes me, rereading it, as a little bit fishy, right? If the son is arachnophobic, and she says that her daughter has always loved animals, why more specifically spiders? I mean, is there something like sibling rivalry going on there, maybe behind the scenes? I'm going to stick it to my brother, who I know is bothered by this sort of thing. I also thought it was weird, too, that she screams favoritism. I think there is favoritism there. And saying we favor him because he's a boy, she also said it's his mental issues. Now, the mental issues, I think she's right about that, right? And that is something that it's kind of unfair to her, but they got to deal with it. But favoring him because he's a boy, I don't get that in this one. Do you?
Without any extra context, there's nothing in here that specifically counts that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was thinking about what are the things that one needs, or what obligations do you have to your family?
Okay.
In order to actually, we talked about relationships earlier. It's what are the things that are required for those? And I think there are definitely other things you can say for a family, especially the nuclear family unit. What are the places where one gives in order to maintain the health and happiness of all the people within that family unit?
That's a good point. And we could think of all sorts of analogous situations that don't involve pets or necessarily even phobias, but could be like, so like she's saying something that kids typically do. It's her room and her life, and she can do what she wants. So, like when we were kids, we played our music, arguably way too loud, and my mom didn't really like that. And now looking back on it as an adult, I think we were really jerks, me and my sister, playing heavy metal whenever we wanted to. We'd actually we lived out in the town of Delafield at the time. So, we lived in a subdivision, but it wasn't all that filled in. And we would put our speakers in the windows, so not only are we the other neighborhood kids would come over and we'd skateboard or play basketball or whatever, but it must have really been awful for the neighbors, for the neighbor adults who weren't into heavy metal. Because we got these kids doing this sort of thing, and it's kind of thoughtless. I mean, they're having a good time with it, but not everybody else is. So,
right.
Or
I get perturbed a little bit when people come, just play music in their car just really loud.
Yeah. Well, now as an older person, I do too. Or when motorcycles are driving by and they're being really noisy, I don't like that either.
Uh-huh.
But I know I'm on the other side of the fence, right?
Usually I don't have a problem with someone just driving by, but if they drive on the street and then park and then just sit and listen to the music that's really loud,
right.
It's why? Just
yeah. So within any sort of living arrangement, I mean, we could talk about college dorms, we could talk about neighborhoods, we could talk about anything you want. There's some things that if you insist on doing, it is your place to do with what you want, but you are being a jerk to other people. Here in the downtown, if we have the windows open, quite often there is such a strong pot smell because, laws aren't being enforced and people love to smoke pot. And it doesn't really bother me too much because, it smells kind of hoppy like a decent IPA, but it bothers my wife, who's a little bit more sensitive to those sorts of things. And if it bothers her, well, then that bothers me. So,
right.
And you could say, well, who cares? It's just for a moment. It's the wind is going to blow differently. It's just somebody walking down the street. And you can say, well, maybe they shouldn't be a jerk like that,
Yeah. Or I guess this is one of the main things that people have to deal with within society in general. At what point do you stop looking at yourself as just a pure individual, and when do you start looking at yourself as a part of a group, and what is the liminal area between there, and what are the ethics are all about how one interacts and integrates with the people around them, and if you're not doing that well,
that is a great point. Yeah.
And
it might not even
questions.
It might not even be a group. There might be a difference that we have to unpack here as we're getting close to the end of the hour. Maybe we'll do this in a different show. There's being in a group, and then there's living in a community where you're actually not in a group with these people. You're not in the same family. You just happen to live in the same neighborhood or use the same streets. You still have a kind of moral obligation, right, to not be a jerk to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we're going to get through any more cases, but we will do more of these if people like this. I think they do, judging from the comments. So do you want to take us out with a pithy quote?
We leave you today with the words of Harlan Ellison. My philosophy of life is that the meek shall inherit nothing but debasement, frustration, and ignoble deaths.